Ever come across a branch of the family who kept doing the unexpected and that you never expected to find on your family tree? Well, this is the Dibbens family, forgotten for many years, who crowbarred their way onto my own tree. We're going to see Australia, multiple marriages, links to Guernsey, Napoleonic War marriages, a football match at Wembley, missing sisters, and of course, rural Somerset. Over on our right is a FamilySearch image which will show plenty that we didn't expect to find. Location-wise, we're looking at Dorset and Somerset in the southwest of England. We should see Tarrant Gunville with the arrow, Sturminster Newton in the bottom right, and also Ansford with the red cross, and then Guernsey, of course, in the English Channel. If you've ever been to Glastonbury Festival by train, you'll get out at Castle Cary Station, which is technically in the village of Ansford, and that is where my ancestor Sarah Speed came from. Now, the vicar of Ansford actually wrote some diaries which name quite a few members of the family, but there's one particular relative we're focusing on today. Looks kind of ordinary. She's Mary Speed, but we'd given her up for lost. We thought we'd come to the end of the line, but we were wrong. Just next to Mary on the tree is her youngest brother, William. He actually left a will. He was in the Navy, I believe. Now, in the will, he mentions a couple of people. He mentions a nephew, William Burge. Very nice. Ties in with the existing family. Yeah, he also mentions his brother-in-law, William Dibbens, there he is, of Gunville in Dorset. Now, that's Tarrant Gunville, near Blandford. It's mentioned, I think, in the Thomas Hardy novels from the Victorian era. And it was big news because last we heard he was actually over in Somerset. So fantastic. We've actually moved him into a new county, Dorset. William was a yeoman, farmer, I guess, 5'9" tall, based on the Somerset militia records. It's quite tall for the time. Now, from the Society of Genealogists records over in London, we found some more baptisms of more children. We'd found Mary, baptised in 1790 in Henstridge in Somerset. Excellent. Now we have two other daughters, Rebecca and Jane, baptised at Tarrant Gunville. Looks like we've come to screech to a halt because Rebecca appears to maybe die in her 20s, maybe in the nearest big town, perhaps as a servant, could have happened. And Jane seems to, in her 30s, perhaps marry a local labourer and sort of disappear really into obscurity. Not sure what happened there. Probably the end of the line. Little do we know, we've got India, Guernsey, Cumberland, all kinds of fun stuff awaiting us. Now, for some determined reason, I decided to check out FamilySearch and just have a proper sort of bash of the keys, and Rebecca does turn up. As we can see, to our surprise, there she is, getting married, aged 50. Her father's clearly William Dibbens. She's in Sturminster, well, that's pretty near to Tarrant Gunville. Only thing is, she's a widow. It looks like she's Mrs. Spragg, and she's marrying to this Mr. Spicknell. And over at the online parish clerk for Dorset, Sturminster Newton marriages have been recorded. Excellent. And we're going to find out that Rebecca will appear there not once, not twice, possibly 3 times. Let's find out. Okay, so here she is marrying to Mrs. Spragg. Her name at this point is Macraff. Then here she is marrying a few years earlier to Abraham Macraff of Cockermouth up north, and her name here is Cox. So we have the full story nearly. So she married not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times, and we don't at the minute know who Miss Cox is, which kind of explains why we never found her, because we never found the marriage of her as Rebecca Dibbens, supposedly to this Mr. Cox. Right, now we go to the census. And from this, we can see that Rebecca Spicknell, it's under her 4th surname, she's listed in Ringwood over in Hampshire. And then 10 years on, she's in Sussex. Sussex, down by the coast, will be a place that plays a strong part in our story. Now, from this 1861 census, she presumably is enjoying a nice time by the seaside. She's a lodger, but an Abraham Maquette No relationship given is also a lodger perhaps with her. Seems quite likely that he's a relative, possibly even a son from her second marriage to Abraham Macbeth Sr. So let's pencil him in as being a son. He's got a story of his own to tell. By the way, those helpful parish registers, the transcripts at the online parish clerk for Sturminster Newton, the nearest big town, did also reveal a fourth sister, Elizabeth. She turns up as a witness. She gets married to Mr. Dowding. We don't really follow her story. It's not very interesting. So the stage is set. It's around the year 1800s, 1805, 1810. Napoleon very much at large. The sea, the British coast, very, very important. Lots going on. And these girls living just maybe 20, 30 miles away from the coast are destined to have several connections with Guernsey. So there's a map showing the key places. Tarrant Gunville on the right, Ansford where we started out, and of course the English Channel. So it could be argued that FamilySearch entry really opened everything up. It got us looking for Rebecca, previously missing, got us seriously to consider that they did actually survive infancy and didn't just die in the local villages. What will happen is that Rebecca, Mary and Jane, the three sisters, they're going to have connections with 15 English counties, which we'll hopefully go through in a little bit of detail. So inspired by Rebecca, who turns up in the censuses with the birthplace of just Gunville, we decided to employ that strategy for Jane as well, her sister. Were there any Janes anywhere in the UK with a birthplace of Gunville? Now, we did find there was only really one person that fitted the bill, Jane Welford. A life of perhaps a little bit of luxury, it's hard to say, at Goff's Oak House, just outside Chestons, maybe 10 miles or so from central London. Interestingly, her husband was a barrister, so we are doing quite well here, based in Chancery Lane. And there is kind of a private coach road that takes you straight from Goff's Oak past the Tottenham Hotspur's training academy, and then you can sort of meander down towards Seven Sisters. So yeah, they had a very nice coach road that would have taken them basically into central London. Jane is interesting. She had married age 40 to Mr. Welford, had two children, and she'd married in Bloomsbury, so central London. She had declared herself to be a spinster, but that really wasn't true. There is plenty to say about Jane. So her son by Mr. Welford was called Richard Welford. He went out to Australia and named an area of land in northwest Queensland, Northaw Downs, after a place in Hertfordshire. Then it became known as Welford Downs after him. Surely he was very naive, settling there, or attempting to, and he was killed, actually. His will not be the only death in Australia, but we do think he was remembered by cousins. Okay. All right, so Jane's first husband was possibly someone called John Williams. There's absolutely no record of a marriage. And yet, in the 1841 census, living with the Welfords is a John Williams. How bizarre is that? An older gentleman, possibly with a connection to overseas, into the military. And in his will, he names Jane to be his only next of kin. That's not really the only surprise in this document, but we suspect that he was the father of her first husband, to whom she was never actually legally married. It is all incredibly puzzling. I think we've done quite well to locate any documents, really, for John Williams. Not quite sure how we managed to do that. Now, have a little look. No stone left unturned. In the document, there is a Miss Rebecca Cox, who appears to be living with the Williams family, possibly as a servant. We can see from the census that Elizabeth Mercer was a servant, so we think that Rebecca might have been too, perhaps looking after one of the young children. So who is Rebecca Cox? That's a bit suspicious, isn't it? We've seen that name before. Right, so the last discovery about Jane is her own will, which we were able to get for free. I think they would have been £10 at this point, if you were to order them online. We got them for free when the London Family History Centre was based at Kew Gardens. Okay, not very easy to read, but we can see that her daughter Ellen is confirmed as a daughter. Also, we can see there is a reference to a niece in Guernsey. So this document was really critical. Okay, we promised you Guernsey. So although Tarrant Gunville was a rural area near Sturminster Newton, it's not that far from the sea. The nearest ports were Poole, and also even nearer was Weymouth. Dorset has had quite a relationship with Guernsey down the years. In fact, you could argue it's the closest English county to Guernsey. So records at the Prue Library show that every Wednesday and every Saturday, I think in the evening, what was called post office packets, cutters of around 80 tonnes, ran from Weymouth to the islands. Their names were the Chesterfield and the Rover. Later, another cutter in 1811 joined the service. So they left in the evening, and the journey, believe it or not, took 36 to 48 hours, nearly 2 days, to reach Guernsey. So it's a serious commitment. Now, that journey time will be shortened to maybe 3 or 4 hours over the coming decades. There was another route to Guernsey, and that's from Brixham down in Devon. So apparently the Brixham route was slightly quicker as it had the southwest breeze behind it, but it's pretty much irrelevant as our young lasses live in Dorset. Another little local gem was that the roads back in those days were only wide enough for a cart, and the inhabitants of Guernsey had so little interaction with each other or the town, I think St Peter's Port, that the parishes could be discovered by their different accents. That was all to change by 1840. Some prices. Well, for soldiers and sailors to travel from Weymouth to Guernsey, it was 5 shillings. Carriages with 4 wheels were £3. Female servants were 15 shillings. And cabin passengers were 21 shillings. I guess they've got a cabin. So I imagine the Dibbens sisters would have taken a cabin. Whether they were married or not when they travelled out there is anybody's guess, really. Now, forget the niece for a second. It looks like we've found an older lady, appears to be Jane's sister. There's a Mary Jones, born in 1791, living in St Peter's Port, the largest town of the island of Guernsey, in the 1871 census, and she's got the birthplace of Henstridge. Well, that can't be a coincidence. It does rather appear that the eldest Dibbens sister seems to have kind of bypassed Sturminster Newton and just born in Somerset and ended up in Guernsey. And she does indeed have a daughter, Mary, that would make sense as being the niece. So the Todevants are living with Mary Jones, ironmongers in the High Street. Following them through, we can see that Elizabeth Dowding turns up. She's actually the missing Dibbens sister that was not at home in the English censuses of 1851. A little frustrating that we hadn't been able to find Mary born in Henstridge just through the censuses, but it was quite exciting following this route. Yes, I guess we hadn't considered of looking in the Channel Islands for our English-born ladies, but here they are. Now, it was incredibly fortunate this particular day I was in Kew because as well as the British wills, or the England and Welsh wills, on microfilm were also the tiny, tiny birth, marriages and deaths microfilm for Guernsey. And I was able to scroll through all of that, basically, and just hoover up any references to Joneses or to Mary Jones, née Dibbon. Okay, so that's the marriage of Elizabeth Jones to Mr. Todevant. Lovely. Incredibly helpfully. By scrolling through, we find 3 members of the family. Now, in Guernsey, women seem to keep their maiden name, at least as a point of reference. Whether they used it in everyday life, I'm not sure. So with Mary Jones, yep, there she is. She's the daughter of the schoolmistress, named in her aunt's will. And we've got Elizabeth Jane, who married Mr. Todevant. You've also got, in the middle there, Jane Elizabeth Jones. She is described as the widow of Mr. Leone. Very, very interesting. So at this point, we're wondering, have we got an Italian connection or even New York? Let's find out. Now, I think this is all the same day. We then checked the probate indexes and found that Jane Elizabeth Jones, aka Leonie, did leave a will herself. Very informative. By the way, subsequently found she'd married him in Paris, and no obvious connection to the States or anything like that. She doesn't have any family, so we don't have loads of family, say for example in Sicily, where the Leonies were from. But a step-grandson apparently shows up living in New York. Pretty cool. So at this point, I decided to literally pop outside and head to the Q Fish Bar and Kebab House, which did offer fine refreshments after a very long day getting data. So back home, we review our family tree. Let's review that now. So we know that Rebecca had this son called Abraham. Pretty sure about that. Jane has married Mr. Welford. She's had the 2 children by him. And then there's also her daughter, Ellen Williams. Okay. Jane having that quite large family by Mr. Williams, such a puzzle. We found some baptisms and burials. Ellen appears to be the only survivor. There's got to be a story there. Also definitely relevant, surely, is this Rebecca Cox, who turns up as a servant in August 1841 to Mr. Williams Sr., who seems to be a family member. She perhaps is Rebecca's child as well. Then we've got the niece Mary Jones. So that enables us to tie up the eldest sister Mary as having married somewhere to William Jones in the military and moving to Guernsey. So from the censuses, living with Mary Jones, we've got the Towdevans, Elizabeth Towdevan, also from the marriage records in Guernsey on that lovely tiny microfilm. We've got more brothers and sisters, Edward James, William John, who went out to Tasmania. From the death indexes, we've got Jane, who marries in Paris to Mr. Leone from Sicily and leaves that fantastic will. And then lastly, we've got Charlotte, who just turns up in her sister Jane's will as Mrs. Tideman or Tideman. We'll round out the picture a bit more in a minute. Let's go back to these 15 counties. It's quite a ridiculous number of places to be associated with. We'll try and do these in order. So Mary Jones in Guernsey had children born in Devon in Wiltshire and, of course, Somerset. Jane spends a little while in Wiltshire with Mr. Williams. Right. Jane then heads for London. She's also in Surrey for a little bit and in Middlesex, I guess. In Hertfordshire, well, that's where Goffs Oak House is based. Jane later moved to Warwickshire, where another daughter got married. Her husband had land in Buckinghamshire. Jane's sister Rebecca, and then Rebecca, she's in Hampshire with husband number 3 and 4. Rebecca's second husband was from Cumberland, possibly the son from that marriage, Abraham, born up there. And that leaves Sussex, where a number of the girls ended up living and dying. And of course, they grew up in Dorset. Next there's Kent, which is where Jane's daughter, surviving daughter, lived. And there's going to be links shortly to Cheshire and to Herefordshire. Okay. And the arrow is just showing Rebecca's ridiculous journey from Cumberland as a, 25-year-old widow heading back down to Dorset. Okay, this is the next segment. It's the second marriage of Rebecca Dibbens. There's 4 to choose from. She had a son, Abraham. We know that from the census. And he married Charlotte Sophia Quick. She looks like a bit of a story. What is she doing? According to Probate Index, she's out in Victoria, Australia. And yeah, her husband is not the executor. And she's also described possibly as being a widow. This is all very strange. There's clearly a will. There's a Sophia Henrietta Cartwright Mullen. what is going on? So the will confirms, perhaps no surprise, Sophia is her daughter, but actually specifically her natural daughter, not born from her marriage. We combed through the birth records for London, and that's tiny window from when she's happy living with husband Abraham and her parents up in Cheshire. And we find, I believe, there's a maritime crossing in the 1850s. It's a very small window. Sure enough, there's Sophia Henrietta Cartwright, not Macreth, but she's born under Thynne. And it's not Cartwright, it's Carteret. So it turned out that Henry Thynne, her partner, was not from the famous Carteret Thynne family, titled Renown, but was, I think, a regular guy from Norfolk. Yep. So she had, it looks like, eloped with this guy. He does act as the informant on the birth certificate, but presumably disappears into thin air. She's not given the correct details for herself. She's given her own mother's maiden name, Glendinning, rather than the real one of Quick. It was registered 31 days late to the birth. And he was a sergeant in the Royal Artillery who did marry a couple of years later after Charlotte had left. So Charlotte did leave the UK 1856, so the following year. It's pretty brutal, this next bit. Sorry, guys. With her brother. It appears to have been, I guess, a chaperone, a younger brother as well. And she was basically sent out there with her daughter. She'd have been all right, I guess. Pretty lonely. She didn't live to a great age. But there were no options on the table. Her marriage wasn't working with Abraham. He wasn't the father. Under the Victorian system, there were really no options. So she was, I guess, disappeared from the family tree. The Henry, by the way, he did marry, as mentioned, but his only child did die. So it's all rather tragic. We're not even sure the family in Australia were aware of this connection. So that's a rather tragic epilogue. So having dealt with Abraham, who, by the way, did remarry after his wife had died, out in Australia, we need to look at Rebecca Cox, his potential sister, and see if there's any proof that we can link everything up together. So we did head to Google at this point. Google has been very good to us on this research. So we just gave it the nutrients of Rebecca Cox in Guernsey, and up popped something incredibly useful. I don't really see how I could have found it, actually. So it's Rebecca living in the 1851 census in a place called Little Hereford in Herefordshire, with a birthplace of Guernsey. Now, that's just staggering, isn't it? So if she was Rebecca's daughter, then her mother was then 21 or so. It's all fitting really rather nicely. Incidentally, Ancestry at this point did have the 1851 census, but it had her place then indexed, birthplace rather, as Germany. So I wouldn't have put two and two together. So thank you to this coxresearch.com website. So our hypothesis at the minute is that Rebecca was born, yes, in Guernsey to Rebecca Dibbens. So Rebecca Jr.'s life is about to change. She's marrying in 1852. We ordered the marriage certificates. It's pretty much had to be her in Little Hereford. To Henry Buggins, a bath housekeeper in Brunswick in Hove. So it's almost Buggins's Brunswick bathhouse in Brighton, but no, it's in Hove. All the bees nearly. Brighton was on the up. It was no longer a fishing port purely, nor the Prince Regent's plaything. People did go on bathing machines rather than just jumping in the sea. That was the thing back then. Well, of course, that is part of the reason why the Dibbens sisters relocated to Brighton and Hove. Would have been Rebecca Cox's husband having a business there. By the way, yes, Mrs. Buggins, she does leave a will. Her only child sadly died. There's a mention of a portrait, and her relationship with half-brother Abraham is confirmed. So that's that. Oh, many years later, some researchers in Guernsey did locate a marriage of a Mr. Thomas Cox to Rebecca Dibbens in Guernsey. She'd have been pretty young. Okay, loose ends on the Channel Islands. The 1841 census, incredibly useful. No clear birthplaces, apart from, I suppose, Jane being born in Wales. There they all are. Edward, Mary, Jane, Amelia, Charlotte, and Rebecca. Amelia very sadly turns up in the asylum. That really just leaves Rebecca. What on earth happened to her? No trace of her in England. Can't find her in the 1851 census. So we got to thinking. Now, Charlotte, by the way, she had gone out to Australia. That marriage to Mr. Dibbens turns up at the Mount Barker Hotel in South Australia. So we just thought possibly Rebecca also, this is Rebecca Jones, went out to Australia. Now, there was a wonderful website, something called Digger. I think it's possibly been renamed. And we did find a plausible marriage of a Rebecca Rosa Jones in Adelaide to a Mrs. Stacey, a shoemaker from Devon. But the actual clincher, so it's a long way, obviously. The actual clincher was that they had a son together called Edward Welford Stacey. Now, that name would be absolutely front and centre to any potential settler from the family from the UK, as Richard Welford, of course, had met his end in a remote district of Queensland. And we think that this young lad is named after him. So that pretty much suggests we've got the right Rebecca Jones, having pinned down somebody about the right time frame, with a rather popular name all the way across the other side of the world. So armed with her full name, we did actually discover then Rosa Jones, living in England in the 1851 census, aged 22, 23. She's a nursery nurse. Of course, once again, her birthplace has at the time of writing gone down as Germany. It was Guernsey. And then we can later find her travelling, where she finds records of her travelling to Australia under something quite interesting. It was the Bishop of Adelaide. He didn't want Adelaide to become the poor cousin of Melbourne. And he'd found that a lot of women who had been encouraged to go out to Australia, sort of even up things up a bit, had got straight off the boat and onto another boat heading east towards Melbourne. So they tried to stop that happening, I guess. So we can add her to the family tree quite comfortably. The information about the Bishop of Adelaide and the eligibility criteria is very interesting. Women were given preference if they were from families that had large numbers of sisters. Guess what? Rebecca did. Okay, I think the last member of the family is Ellen Williams. She married aged 40 at the, I think it's the Pebble Dashed Church at St Mary's at Cheshunt. Ellen Williams marrying Mr. Brown took a moment or two to discover that. Ellen died fairly young in Wandsworth or Fulham, and her own daughter, Ellen, will just spend a little bit of time looking at, I guess. She married a cousin and went out to India, where she was in charge of a coffee operation. It's just a little instructive to look at a photograph, I guess. So she's Jane Dibbens' granddaughter. Living many miles away from the coast, where her own children and some grandchildren were raised as well. And just briefly, this lady here, she does have a son called William, who painted the famous picture of the White Horse at Wembley in about 1923. Okay, so the final family tree looks something like this. Lots of mysteries have been solved, covered a lot of ground, had to use several different research methods, not miss clues, particularly that Rebecca Cox business. Definitely use Google, be aware of some of the history of the time. I would say this is a history that is totally shaped by the wars and battles of the Napoleonic era. Incidentally, William Speed, that's the uncle of these guys, he was also on a boat An 800 boat gunner, the St. George, who seized the Bounty from the St. Jago, a Spanish ship. Very interesting. We now know that Rebecca was, second child, was only about 18 when she went out to Guernsey and got married to a soldier there. But it's just really interesting that her sister followed, that Jane also seems to have got together with a soldier, and they occupied those 15 counties and really kept us guessing. Just a bit more about Guernsey from research conducted while exploring this family. So we'll put up some photographs so you can see what Guernsey was like back then. Bit of a mixture of images. I was really taken with the roads being only wide enough for a cart. This is local historian Ferdinand Brock-Tubber. So that the inhabitants had so little interaction with each other that their parishes could be discovered by their different accents. Amazing. The high hedges on either side of the roads were planted with trees and covered with wild primroses, violets and harebells. Charabancs were almost useless as excursions were made on foot or on horseback. Other sources were the Prue Library, apologies for the mispronunciation, the Stranger's Guide to Guernsey from 1833, the islandwiki.org, the Society Genealogical of Guernsey, Google was useful, The History of Guernsey by Jonathan Duncan. So, by 1840, the island was to have excellent roads and powerful steam vessels running constantly to England, Jersey and to France. It had a handsome courthouse, a secure jail, commodious marketplaces and flagged footpaths. By this time they had 6 physicians and 22 surgeons in the main town, St. Pierre Port or St. Peter Port, and the houses in the high street had been converted into shops. So the sisters would have experienced a considerable period of change over this time. We know that Rebecca was there by 1812 when she got married, and then the elder sister Mary was still there in the 1860s and 70s. They would have seen huge changes. We don't really know what prompted them to leave Dorset for Guernsey, but we're just grateful for the excursion.